Vance Merolla, Worldwide Director of Global Sustainability at Colgate Palmolive Company. Rana Adib, Exec Director of REN 21. It's 45 minutes, it's live, and I'm sure there are hundreds of you that will be tuning in right now have questions that need answering. Well, these speakers are here to share their work and hopefully provide the answers and ideas that you're looking for. So do use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of the video stream to get everything answered for you. Right, over to you, Rana.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction and welcome everybody. Welcome in particular Diana and Vance, obviously. So this session we'll speak actually about strategies, approaches and innovation to decarbonize the supply chains. So options to reducing scope 3 emissions are quite limited, and actually they are very often indirect influence. And I think this is actually what will be really interesting to discuss now with Diana and Vance. Maybe quickly as a background, because we have two different sectors represented in this discussion. So Corbion is the global market leader in lactic acid and is a leading supplier also of emulsifiers, functional enzymes, blends, minerals, vitamins, etc. So very much looking at the downstream side on the supply chains. Whereas Colgate Palmolive company, sorry, I speak it with a more French or German accent, I guess, is a global consumer goods company. And I think Diana and Vance will go much more into detail to explain what the challenges and opportunities are in this field. So I'm looking forward to learn more about the strategies you're putting in place. And to start with, it would be really interesting if you could give me an overview about your main strategies to reduce downstream and upstream carbon emissions along your supply chains. Where are the big leverage points, and how did you also identify these? Maybe Diana, if you could start, this would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Rana. I'm excited to be a part of this panel, and I look forward to a nice discussion, and happy to answer any questions from everyone, of course. So let me start with a bit more background on Corbion. So we are a B2B company. We manufacture sustainable ingredient solutions based on renewable resources for the food sector. But also for other sectors, we also manufacture bio-based chemicals, bio-based plastics, and they are used in a variety of different sectors and offer an alternative for chemicals derived from fossil fuels. So if you look at our supply chain, the majority of our raw materials are actually derived from agriculture, but we do not source directly from farmers. There's typically one or multiple other actors in the supply chain, typically processors, that convert these agricultural raw materials into oils or into sugars that we can then use in our manufacturing. So an important component of our strategy at Corbion is to reduce our carbon footprint, which is of course the topic of today's discussion. And about 1 year ago, we announced our science-based carbon footprint target, and we are aiming for a 33% reduction of our emissions per ton of product by 2030, compared to our base year, which is 2016. And this target has been approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative as being in line with the Paris Agreement. And to get to this target, we assessed the carbon footprint of our entire value chain according to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And this was a very helpful exercise because it really helped us to determine where to focus and which are the most relevant topics. And there were some interesting observations. First of all, only about 20% of our carbon footprint is actually related to our own use of energy and our own manufacturing. So scope 1 and 2 emissions are only about 20%, and the remaining 80% is scope 3, which is indirect and harder to influence, as you already mentioned. Another interesting point, so we are primarily using renewable bio-based resources, and because of this, emissions related to the use of our products and related to the end of life of our products are not significant because these would be bio-based emissions. So the downstream scope 3 emissions are not that relevant for us. So for us, it's really more in the upstream, and the main contributors to our carbon footprint are raw materials and also transport, both transport of raw materials and transport of finished goods. So as a next step in this assessment to enable really a focused approach, we did some additional analysis to really understand how to best focus our efforts. Where can we have the largest impact, both looking at size, but also looking at our ability to influence, because some parts are also more difficult to influence than others, obviously. So when diving a bit deeper, it was actually quite interesting to realize that actually only 5 raw materials contribute to 60% of our raw material footprint. So that was quite amazing to realize, because it means we can really focus our efforts on these specific raw materials. And these raw materials are obviously also very much core in the manufacturing of our core products like lactic acid, you mentioned, and also emulsifiers. And these raw materials are already strategic, also more from a procurement perspective, looking at more cost, security of supply, etc. So we already had quite good relations with the suppliers, which is of course a good starting point for engagement. So this really helped. Regarding transport, we look more at the main segments and the regions. We realized that 90% of our transport emissions are related to road transport, so that's also a clear focus area. And we also there decided that we have to focus on transport that we arrange ourselves, because that's the area where we can influence. And from that, what are then our main strategies? We basically have 2 main strategies for emission reduction. The first strategy is supplier engagement. So we are, as I said, we focus on these core raw materials where we already have some strategic partnerships in place. So we want to develop those further to also basically work with our suppliers to reduce the carbon footprint of these raw materials. And then the second strategy is more focused on process innovation. So this is really much more innovation that is directed at being the best-in-class manufacturer of lactic acid and of some of the other products that are relevant for Corbion. We have defined an R&D program, and here we are investigating ideas, mostly looking at reducing our consumption of certain raw materials. And this can be through improving yields, improving efficiencies, but also through recycling. And next to that, there could be opportunities to switch to different raw materials with a lower carbon footprint. So this is a bit a high-level overview of how we gave focus to our program, and also the main strategies that we are trying to take to achieve our goal.
Okay, thank you very much. This is super interesting. So I think, Vance, in your sector, the situation is probably a bit different. So same question to you. How did you assess it? What are the strategies, key leverage points?
Sure. No, thank you, Rana and Diana. It's great to be here. This is such a timely topic, decarbonizing our supply chain, our whole value chain, actually. So yeah, similar to Diana, I guess, different type of company. So Colgate, Palmolive, a consumer products company. We were founded in New York City in 1806. We've been around a long time, and we have a very complex supply chain. So if you think about from end to end what we do, for us, the impacts were surprising in a different way. So I'd say about 10 years ago, Colgate, we started to conduct a sort of a comprehensive top-down carbon footprint for scope 1, scope 2, and all the scope 3 pieces of greenhouse gases. And like many companies, we had to use secondary data and make some high-level assumptions. It was enough to help us identify where the greenhouse gas hotspots were, because that's where you sort of have to start. And what we learned was that, different than, I guess, Diana's, like in our value chain, only our manufacturing facilities where we were really thinking that's where the carbon, it was only about 1% of the footprint. And so what that left us with was 9% related to the suppliers, the suppliers that provide us the raw materials and packaging materials that we have, which that sort of made sense. But a full 90% was associated with the product use phase of our products. If you think about what we have products like toothpaste and shampoo and soap and those types of products that use a lot of energy and a lot of water by the consumer. So having 90% of the footprint being with the consumer was our big aha moment. That was several years ago. So kind of daunting in a way, but also an opportunity. So we'd already been working very hard on our own operations to reduce CO2, and we will always do that in our own facilities, but it was a small piece of it. But we've always done energy efficiency, and we build LEED certified factories, and we do energy treasure hunts, and we have an investment program, 5% per capital for the planet, and lots of stuff that we do on our own operations. We had to think, how do we extend this into innovations with suppliers as well as with the consumers? So I know we're going to talk more in detail on some of this, but I guess in short, our strategies to reduce greenhouse gases along our value chain are, as I mentioned, for our operations, it's primarily energy efficiency and then the use of renewable energy. So that's really the way we go at it for our own operations. For our suppliers who bring us our goods, it's more and more around engaging, I'd say, the most carbon intensive material suppliers first, starting there. We'd love to engage every supplier one-on-one on this, but we've got many of them. So really focusing on the carbon intensive material suppliers first, and work with them on also their energy efficiency and their renewable energy use, and maybe even their processes or what feedstocks they use. So there's a lot when you get into that area with your suppliers. And then on consumers, it's a pretty wide range of things that we can do. So more and more, we're looking to design products that actually have lower carbon footprints, either the ingredients and packaging or how they're made, or maybe a product that uses less water or energy by the consumer during the consumer use phase, or even the packaging, making the packaging more recyclable, reusable, and compostable, so it has a lower footprint as well. And then there's a whole other aspect I think we'll touch on later around the consumer behavior and habits, like changing consumer behaviors through messaging and influencing what they do, because we can't, that piece is with them, but we have a role in helping them educate or helping them change habits and in the way they use our products. So many ways to get at greenhouse gas reduction through the value chains. I'd say that what's common is they all require a little bit of thinking and innovation and trial and error. And I think we'll get into a little bit more detail about each pieces of those. But for us, it is definitely more interesting that it's on the consumer side of it and the new stuff that we need to do to get there.
Thank you, Vance. So, yes, indeed. I think we have like the supply side on your side, Diana, and more the consumer side on yours, Vance. And probably I think a common challenge here is that the influence is quite indirect on these players. So I'll start with you, Vance, because you said, okay, how do you communicate with the customer side? How do you inspire and incentivize them? Because if you have 90% of your carbon footprint, which is linked on that part of the supply chain, I think you probably have some innovation and secrets to share here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if secrets as much as I think a little bit of common, of common sense together with innovation. I'd say, on the product use phase, which as I mentioned, is the largest part of our footprint, we need to continually find ways to either reduce or help consumers reduce when they use our products. So there's a few things we could do. With our new 2025 sustainability strategy, which we're announcing publicly very shortly, we have a few ambitions that we're working on. And so one of them is the idea of designing up front, like the actual design piece. So we call it design more sustainable products. So doing things like using less carbon intensive materials, or the same material from a less carbon intensive supplier, materials or packaging, right? Or making our products with more recyclable, reusable, compostable packaging overall, the design choice we make. Or designing products, as I mentioned before, there's a way to either have less water in them, or the consumer can use less water or less energy. So those are all sort of design ideas and sort of R&D type of things that we can do. I'd say though, the important piece that we're just touching on, that we're just a little bit newer, is really trying to understand the aspect of addressing greenhouse gases when they're actually in the hands of the consumer. And we're calling that build sustainable habits for life. So that's the ambition that really gets at. So we talked about design, but then there's actually the use and sustainable habits for life. That has a lot of great potential. And, we've done some really innovative things already, I'd say. Like, for example, this past year, like we've designed, but then rolled out the first of its kind recyclable toothpaste tube. So it's the first recyclable toothpaste tube. It's been rolling out around the world starting this year. It'll be all over the world, next several years as we retool and run that out. So that was innovative. And I'd also mention with the recyclable tube, the other thing we did, I think, which I'm really proud of, is that we've opened it. Now the technology took about 5 years to develop, truthfully, and we have it. And now we've open sourced it. We've basically given it away to the technology for free to anyone who wants it, including competitors. for obviously the right thing to do, but also to help accelerate the scale of the tube recycling. You know, we don't want to be the only company with a recyclable tube. We want it to be universal. So that's an innovative way to kind of, at the consumer use piece, to really scale it. The other great example I'd mention real quick is our Save Water campaign. So if you, I don't know if people know about it or not, but we've had that out since 2016. And what it simply does is sends a simple message to consumer to literally turn off the tap while you brush your teeth. And that may sound really simple, and it is simple, but you know, when you sell 8 billion tubes of toothpaste and people are brushing their teeth over work, and you multiply that times the amount of times they do it, the impact could be extraordinary. And we actually go and we estimate that every year through consumer surveys to see, are people changing their habits? Are they turning off the tap when they brush their teeth or take a shower, whatever that is? And then we estimate back the carbon impact. And I think since 2016, if I get the number right, it's about 8 million metric tons of carbon or greenhouse gases avoided just by just turning off the tap and understanding the Save Water campaign. And I think it's about 150 billion gallons of water avoided as well. So it's an interesting way to just a small behavior that dwarfs anything we could ever do on our own operations, just by using, you know, less water. Billions of tubes of toothpaste multiplied through that many consumers can have a big impact on your carbon and water footprint.
Okay, so I guess much on the innovation part on the products you can directly influence, but lots of communication also and awareness raising campaign, I would imagine. Now, Diana, on your side, it's very much on the suppliers. I mean, you spoke about the fact that you have actually one of the hotspots is luckily your 5 strategic key suppliers, I guess. But how do you inspire, incentivize, or influence them? Do you put in place standards, other partnerships? What are the tools and leverage points here?
Yeah, we started this journey, well, maybe about 2 years ago of really engaging with our suppliers on this specific topic. Initially, it was mostly awareness raising and also to investigate a little bit the situation at each of our suppliers and realize that in some regions, suppliers are already really advanced. They are measuring CO2. They have a reduction program targets in place, or they already know about opportunities. In other regions, it's all new. Yeah, learning from that, we now really take a tailored approach. So we take into account the local situation, the maturity of the supplier regarding both measurements and also reduction of CO2 emissions, and also existing local sector initiatives. And then the most important, of course, is to try to find the win-win. So try to find those situations that CO2 reductions are also aligned with some form of benefit for our suppliers. So to give a few examples, so one of those key raw materials that we are using is sugar. We source it in Europe, in Brazil, in Thailand, and the situation is quite different everywhere. So sugar, obviously, I think our suppliers are very aware of climate change. They can readily share data. They have a clear overview of opportunities they plan to work on, and they typically have targets already in place. So there, it's really clear what needs to be done, and we do not really need to do any education. They already have it all in place. In Brazil, for instance, this was really quite different. The knowledge level is much lower, and we had to spend much more time to create awareness and understanding. And the approach we decided to take in Brazil, and this was something we also learned along the way, is that we are now going to make use of a tool that was recently introduced by the government in Brazil. And this tool will incentivize sugar producers to improve their carbon footprint. And this is also related to the production of bioethanol. So in Brazil, the producers of sugar, they also produce ethanol, and they also produce renewable energy. And of course, the Brazilian government is also stimulating a lot the bioethanol production. They want to incentivize sugar producers and ethanol producers to reduce CO2. So this tool, it's called Renova Bio. It gives our suppliers really a financial incentive to reduce their carbon footprint, mostly for bioethanol, but then this also results in a lower carbon footprint for the sugar. And we're going to use this tool to also understand the performance of our different suppliers, so that we can then also incentivize the best performing supplier with more volume from our side. So this is a bit the approach that we take in Brazil. So mostly making use of a local initiative that goes hand in hand with carbon footprint reduction of the sugar. And in Thailand, which is actually the largest, where we have our large manufacturing site, there we focus on the implementation of a certification standard, the Sucrose standard for sustainable sugar. And this standard has a proven lower carbon footprint compared to more conventional sugar production. It's also clear that companies that have implemented this standard, they are also through continuous improvements, they further reduce their carbon footprint. So this, we believe, is a good way to manage CO2 reduction in Thailand. And in Thailand, we also work, and this is under the umbrella of Bonsucro. We work together with other end use of sugar, and we try to really bring a similar message to the sugar supplier. So a few years back, that message was really focused on sustainable sugar production, implementable sucrose standard. I think it's now only maybe 3 or 4 years ago that the first sugar mill in Thailand actually got Bonsucro certified. And we then of course also purchased the sugar from them. So we work together with other end users there to really also drive the uptake of Bonsucro by the Thai sugar mills. And this, I think, is now, it's really a tool that is being used there because of that. And then on the other side, if I can also say something about the second strategy, the innovation strategy. I already mentioned that we're also looking at how we need to continue to innovate and have the best-in-class production process for, amongst others, our lactic acid. Both from a cost but also from a sustainability point of view. And over the last, probably about 10 years, we have developed a new production process, the lime-free or gypsum-free production process, which eliminates the use of lime. And lime is really a raw material with quite a high carbon footprint. Mm-hmm. And this will enable us to produce lactic acid with a 20% lower carbon footprint. And we are, we have announced that we will implement this in our new plant in Thailand, which will, start operating in 2023. So this is the result of a long innovation program over quite a long period, and we're very excited that we can now, really implement this and thereby also contribute to our carbon footprint reduction target.
Mm-hmm. That's exciting. I think it's, and I'm very happy actually to hear that both of you actually in your sectors, you're also, sharing the experiences and working with players, open source competitors also, because I do think this is probably also innovation we need and working together in a different way to address the global challenges ahead. So now, since we're in such a collaborative and safe space, and that falling is part of the learning process. I mean, I learned, I read in some book that kids fall more than 1,000 times, and this falling is part of the learning to walk. Now, obviously, we have challenges ahead, which we are discovering. To a certain extent, we are all pioneers, and pioneers also face sometimes failures and challenges, but they help us to learn more and do things differently. And I would be really, really keen to, or happy if you could share some of these failures and challenges you faced, how you overcame these, and what you learned for the future. And maybe before asking a question, I'm really inviting the audience also. There is a chat function. If you have any questions to Diana and Vance, please don't hesitate to drop your question here. And toward the end of the session, I'll have some time to pick up on your questions. So who would like to start?
Vance, you always like me to start? Sure. Yeah, I'm jumping in to talk about challenges and failures. That's always good. No, but you're absolutely right, Ron. I mean, none of this is defined. If it was easy, we would all be doing it perfectly, right? And there's so much ahead that we're not sure how we'll get there, but that's okay. We have to figure it out. So yes, I guess I spoke to the consumer piece. Maybe the challenges I'll speak to is a little bit on our supplier side too, which is really important. So it's not as big a piece of the footprint, but engaging our suppliers in climate change. We've been doing it for years, but I'll be honest, sometimes it's difficult and it's a challenge. I mean, there's many challenges for our suppliers. They're not all as large as us, and many of them don't even know the details of what their carbon footprint are, or really understand their role in climate change. They may not have any data or incomplete data, right, or even resources to dedicate to it. You know, so there's a lot of challenges there, and I think that's where we've you know, we've had some successes, but we, you know, at times we stall and we start again. And I think, you know, we do get data. We have CDP supply chain, so that supplies data. We've been doing that for many years. You know, sending questions about greenhouse gases out to suppliers and get back what we get back. But it's not always everything we need. It's not a full response. I'd say, you know, so that's a big challenge. I don't know if necessarily a failure. I think it's what the industry is experiencing, to be honest with you. It's the next big thing to solve. But I think this year, at least one way to get at that is we also set a science-based target for Scope 3. This is our second approved science-based target we just set. And this time the Scope 3 emissions was really related to our suppliers and the greenhouse gases to reduce by 30% their greenhouse gases by 2025, which is a huge challenge. But I think just having this out there as a new measurable goal was a challenge that's helped us accelerate our thinking on how to get this done differently than we've done in the past. We have some successes I mentioned, but it's not universal. So I think with this new target, we're now sharing this target with more suppliers to say, look, you're a part of it, we're in it together. Or as before, it was just engagement to try to work on it. Now we have a target. And so that I think was big. We're conducting webinars with some of the suppliers, really to get them into it and understanding what it is. So we're building the company, trying to build the competency with them. Actually bringing in we're having one-on-one innovation meetings with some of the larger suppliers to say, what are you doing on climate? I mean, they may have solutions that we never heard of. In fact, some of them do. And so that's developing it together. So that's a really hopeful piece as well. And also explaining, you know, this doesn't have to be extra work. And I think that the more forward-thinking suppliers are not seeing this as another thing to do. They're seeing it as an opportunity to engage, and they're seeing it as an opportunity to manage their own risks. So I think there's a paradigm shift happening, you know, in that whole space. So I think that's one of our big challenges, figuring out how to do it. I could give you one quick example of a success we have had, I'd say, over the years that this isn't new. We've been working for many years on an ongoing relationship with our mint farmers. So the people who grow the mint that wind up actually in our toothpaste in the end of the day. It's a pretty interesting niche industry, but it's, you know, very water intensive and interesting. So over the past several years, we've worked with the mint industry and the growers on evaluating climate scenarios, like related to their farms and potential risks associated with mint farming. And today we're collecting water data at the farm level to understand, you know, who's efficient and who could be more efficient, and investing in irrigation systems that are, you know, more climate resilient and that type of thing. So it can be done. Now, to me, it's about picking. You couldn't probably do that with every supplier you have, but really finding the ones where you have impact and risk and opportunities. I think that's really the way to go about it. And so there are tangible things we can do on climate. We just have to be strategic and mindful about it. And so this new goal, I think, is really going to hopefully push us in a new direction.
Mm-hmm. Maybe just a quick follow-up question, Vance. When we speak about data today, we also speak about digitalization and artificial intelligence. What is the role of this innovation actually in your activities?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, and there's no, I think, Rana, there's a lot going on. I mean, a lot of initiatives. It seems like all of a sudden, from anything from, you know, SAP taking, you know, trying to mechanize and automate collection of climate data from all our suppliers. We were an SAP company like many, right? So having a company like that, figuring out how to digitize and bring that in so it's more automated, or this new the new initiative coming out just recently from World Business Council Sustainable Development on how do we do a common footprint that everyone does the same way, which will include getting primary data from suppliers. So we're seeing a lot of innovation, because truthfully, each company doing it on their own is probably not going to get us there if we all do it, if we'll kind of do it differently and we're not talking to each other. So I'm seeing a lot more consortium related type things to really get at the supplier challenge. Mm-hmm. And we're gonna participate in the ones that really make sense for us. And so I have a lot of hope that the industry will take care of this together, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Diana, now to you to speak about challenges, failures, how you overcome these and possibly turn it into successes.
Yeah, and I really recognize, Vance, what you were just discussing about the challenge of the data collection, which is also one of our challenges at the moment. But let me give you two examples of difficulties we had in our journey. Maybe to start with one that is already a bit older. When I just started in my role as sustainability director, so that's about 5-6 years ago. At some point, I was very happy that we had set very clear targets, and I made the mistake for one of them to sort of assume that if we have a target, well, people will work towards it. So that it will just happen, and this is of course something that I now know will not happen. It's important to also really build a roadmap and make sure that the roadmap is also embraced, accepted by everyone in the organization, or well, by the people that need to make it happen. So build a roadmap, make it concrete, and provide support where needed, because just setting a target, it's not enough. It gives direction, of course, but if it's too high level, it needs to be made concrete to really make it happen, and it needs to be translated into different sub targets, perhaps, or different activities that people need to undertake. And then it's also important to adjust the business processes, so to allow people to take certain aspects, like in the case of CO2 reduction, in decision making. Also the CO2 reduction and the cost impact both need to be taken into account. And in some cases, we've now seen examples where maybe people wouldn't bring forward certain ideas, certain energy reduction opportunities, because they think financially the business case is not good enough. But now that we have this carbon footprint reduction target, it's actually a different situation, and really need to make sure that people do bring these topics forward, because the decision is now different than it was a few years back. So it's also important to have a good look at your business processes and how you make decisions, to make sure that these kind of things are taken into account. And maybe another example. So for one of our, another key raw material, we had in a certain region multiple suppliers, and we reached out to them to explain about science-based targets and what we were trying to achieve. The response was quite mixed, and actually only one of them seemed to be enthusiastic to collaborate with us. So we spent quite some time to develop a project. It was related to sustainable agriculture. And we wanted to investigate certain more sustainable practices like cover crops, and try to improve carbon footprint of the raw material in that way. And when we were already quite advanced defining the project and finding partners to collaborate with, we actually realized that the approach with only one of those key suppliers involved was not going to work in this situation, because we would not be able to scale it to the other suppliers. We were in this specific situation also not able, we realized, to let go of suppliers that would not implement these type of strategies. So from this experience, we really learned to be cautious and really understand also the procurement situation and the supply situation, and do not focus on a single supplier. You need an approach that is scalable, so you really need to understand the supply situation also moving forward. And as the alternative approach, and this is something we're still developing, will be more of a landscape approach, where we're not collaborating specifically with the supplier, but more focusing on the farming area.
Super interesting. I think the data topic has triggered some questions. I was getting worried, but our audience got active. So thanks a lot for the questions. I think there is a part on data. I'll combine two questions from Connor and Kat, actually. There's one, what systems do you use or can you recommend to monitor and collect primary data from your farm level suppliers? And the other one is, what are your best practice on verifying and validating the data? So on Rent one side, we work very much on data on renewable energy, and it's true that the data and the quality of it and the validation is really, really important. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Diana, maybe you start.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so actually at the moment we are still investigating what is the best tool to use for the supplier data collection. So I can tell you what we've used so far. So far we have used Excel-based questionnaires, which is really a challenge and a struggle, because in the end, when we have more data, it will not be feasible to have a good overview. So we have looked at different suppliers, and we have also looked at existing tools we have to collect data from suppliers more regarding quality. And we still need to take a decision on this, to be honest, to see what is the best tool. But for sure, you need a tool that allows you to, the tool should offer a good database so that you can really look back at the numbers from year to year, compare them. There should be some sort of a quality management. And ideally you want the tool to be able that the supplier can also log into the tool and enter their data without you needing to be in between. So you want to automate it as much as possible. The second question about verification. So I talked a little bit about sugar. And there we use this combination in Brazil of the Renova Bio tool, which is actually a certified tool. And we use the Bonsucro certification in Thailand. And on top of that, we are this year starting to do, we were already auditing our suppliers, but now we're also going to include a greenhouse gas training and also data verification to understand the data quality. And based on that, we see how we proceed, if we need to proceed doing it in that way, or if we can rely on the data we receive through the different certifications.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Vance?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very much like Diana on this. I don't think anyone has an answer to this. For me, I mean, getting primary data is going to always be a challenge. So there's two things: there's actually collecting the data, and then there's the piece about the process to actually turn that into something that's meaningful that across industries that everybody can compare, let's say, or if it's apples to apples. So there's the two huge issues, and then of course verifying, validating. But I mean, personally, I think the way this will get done more quickly is using sort of companies or in-house tools that exist already, not creating more systems. So I spoke about like SAP. SAP manages, if they manage your data coming in of everything you purchase, it's a very common sense place to figure out a solution within that to create, you know, more primary data if of course the supplier will provide it, right? So I think using existing systems or Salesforce data, there's a lot of these big companies that are service providers to big corporations are looking to do this because they see an opportunity. They should be the ones to fix this kind of incoming collection system. And of course you have CDP supply chain, which you could always use, but again, it's how do you automate it? So it's not like Diana was saying, a one-off. I mean, we could work with our suppliers and send them questionnaires and get stuff back. That's great and it works. But can we do that with 10,000 suppliers? Probably not. So that the systemization of it, the IT solutions have to be standardized. And then, you know, once you get it, the initiative like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, their SOS 1.5 project, everybody agrees to the rules of the boundaries, how it's measured, how it's talked about, and what those carbon numbers mean, you know, beyond even the greenhouse gas protocol. That's where it comes to life. So there's no, I wish I had the answer today of what systems to use and how to verify and all that. I don't think any of us have that yet, but I think that's where we're all working towards.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And there's another question which, and Diana, you had mentioned too, like how in the process, basically, some solutions were not put forward in the past because they didn't seem economic, but now with other targets, actually there is a motivation or a need also to motivate other solutions. The question is here, how you encourage businesses externally, basically, your partners, to prioritize sustainable decisions versus financially more beneficial decisions. Because you might have integrated in your own decision tools something where, let's say, the carbon footprint is monetized, for instance, but your suppliers might not. So what do you do?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Obviously, it cannot be done in the same way as internally. The way that we've approached it with our suppliers so far is by really focusing the discussion on on their carbon footprint, basically, and So for those key raw materials, since it's not that many, we also have a good understanding ourselves what their carbon footprint looks like. So we can already, we understand a little bit where the improvement opportunities are, or where at least the main challenges are. We really ask our suppliers to come up with any ideas that they have, and then jointly we can see how cost effective or maybe not or cost prohibitive they are. My experience so far is that they do come up with multiple ideas, and some of them are then clearly also less economically feasible perhaps. But I think our suppliers, or at least this specific supplier I'm now thinking of, they also do this to show us that they listen to us and that they come with ideas, and then we jointly have to see if there is a way that we can make it happen. But I think it's harder to you cannot do it in the same way as you could internally. So I think you still need to ask them to come up with different ways of how can you reduce your carbon footprint, and then determine together if there is a business case.
And Vance, maybe so even though you might be focused more on the consumers, but you might also have some experience here with your suppliers.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And we really look to our responsible sourcing team, our procurement teams to help us with this. We want sustainability embedded in the procurement process, not to be owned by our sustainability team. But I mean, I think in general, just like anything else, encouraging a supplier to participate in this, there's always the sort of risk and opportunity thing, right? Try to explain, they may not understand what risks they are associated with climate change for their operations. So risk is always one, I think, and then opportunities is an opportunity to partner with their customer, just to innovate and create new things. And I think the ones that are seeing this as an opportunity are really rushing towards it more than running away. So I think there could even be a business advantage. And then ultimately, right, don't we want to make this part of procurement expectations with a supplier, relationship expectations, just like we expect cost and quality and service. We would expect, sustainability or climate risk or whatever the topic is with them that really matters. And I think that's a process over time that will just have to become part of the norm. If it's procurement over here and sustainability over here, I don't think it's ever going to really work the way it needs to.
No, that's really interesting. I mean, I promised you that I would have an energy question for you at the end, but I think we're a bit running out of time. But what we clearly see is that basically in the supply chains, you have really a lot of weight in putting a standard and influencing your suppliers and the whole ecosystem. And I think this is really something which is, so there were questions on code of conduct, certification, integrating standards into the activities along the supply chain. And I think that's something which is, changing the norms to some extent. I'll just end with one of the questions which somebody has put forward here, because I think it's really important in a globalized world, and also you touched upon this. How do you navigate across cross-cultural differences across the global ranches, especially when it comes to compliance to energy and sustainability targets? Because here there is very different aspects. I think, Diana, you had mentioned this a bit. Maybe we start with you, Vance.
So if the question is specifically to suppliers and supply chain, of course, again, I'll come back to any business relationship. So we're a very global company, right, that you're doing, whether it be procurement or product development or marketing, it all has to be done in the context of whatever that local market is. And for responsible sourcing, again, I would look to our teams who know how to do procurement very well in different geographies, different divisions, different cultures, to just incorporate it, specifically risk issues or social issues or whatever the sustainability issue is in the appropriate way locally. And so, a lot of time today, of course, to go to market by market on that. But again, I don't think talking about it sort of separately. I think a lot of these questions can be answered with just build it in, don't bolt it on kind of thing, right? Build it into your processes. And I think it extends to the question you just said specifically.
And Diana, from your side?
Yeah, I agree. It's so our teams. So this is all done in collaboration with procurement, of course, or mostly done by procurement. And I think the cultural aspect. yeah, by making sure that, for instance, my colleagues all over the world also have a good understanding of sustainability, why it is important. And this did require some education, because I think colleagues in other parts of the world that are less familiar maybe with climate change and also with carbon footprint and everything we discussed, they needed to have more, they needed to gain knowledge on the topic. But then they can indeed engage on the topic with our suppliers, with their normal day-to-day partners at the same level, because they are part of the same culture. So in that sense, it's really through the local people.
Okay, and so to end with, I'll give both of you 22 seconds for a last statement. Diana, please go ahead.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about analyzing and etc. So my recommendation to everyone is, of course, analyze, look where your big impacts are, where you can influence, but also just get started. Don't worry too much about making mistakes, because you will make mistakes. It's better to get started and go for it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Vance.
And I'll build on that just real quick as well. I mean, these are big topics, you know, trying to achieve net zero carbon by 2040, which is one of our goals, or 100% renewable electricity. These seem big and daunting, and they are, but really, like, prioritizing, putting it into business processes, and just really fighting it one battle at a time. And don't be worried if you have a misstep and you have to start over. You'll learn from that as well. So again, I've been doing this a very long time, but I'm encouraged to see what the energy behind this, and I think, you know, all of us together is the way to get at this. So, and thanks for having us today, Rana.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for bringing up the energy. So I learned a lot as a renewable energy person here in this context, and my learning here is very clearly that we fight our battles in different areas and ecosystems towards a joint goal, and I think there is probably a lot of opportunities to bridge basically these more and bring these ecosystems together, and we'll be stronger and can create some alliances here. So thanks a lot to both of you. This was a very interesting discussion. Thanks a lot to Transform Europe Virtual for having us here. And I think I'm sending over back to the organizers.
Thank you, Rana. Thanks, Vance, and thanks to you as well, Diana, for a really interesting discussion there. Now, we're moving into the penultimate session of the day. Before we do dive in, if you haven't already done so, take part in our poll, which the questions are by the live stream, and we'll share the results with you at the end of the event and through our written content post the event as well. Next up, we have an exclusive discussion from Reuters ESG analytics partner, Constellation Research. They're talking with a Reuters journalist on revealing insights into their new modeling system and analytics platform that measures the transition opportunity and risk in carbon intensive sectors. Talking to this work is Tim Nixon, who's the co-founder and SVP of Business Development and Partnerships at Constellation Research. And he's talking with Lauren Young, who is the editor of Digital Special Projects at Reuters. Here's the discussion.